Welcome to Bracket U, a college basketball bracket podcast brought to you by Delphi Bracketology. This is our 13th episode of the season. We're in our 8th year of bracketology, and we wish to bring you weekly updates. We've been off for about 10 days, but update as the tourney gets closer to let you know where your favorite team might be in regards to the seeding for the NCAA tournament. This podcast is for all you junkies whose March Madness is kicking in. We're able to create new content thanks to the sponsorship of Coca-Cola Bottling of Kokomo and generous donations of our followers, which we've received a couple. We have this VCU flag in the back from one of our VCU followers. We appreciate that very much. And we also got a nice check in the mail from one of our local supporters here that goes to pay for our web fees, and that goes to pay for our food and things like that when we meet. So thank you for all of you who have been very generous in our donation. Special thanks to Bob Thompson for creating our intro music, and to Jared Morris of the Assembly Call for inspiring us to branch out. I'm Brian Tonsoni. Joining me this evening are our editors, Cade Nelson and Luke Smock, and tonight we'll be focusing on the bubble. But before we get to the bubble, we'll discuss a few items from the top of our seed list, and I'll try to get my voice to settle down and be normal here so we can have a conversation. One of the things that we talked about in our meeting today, guys, is the number one seed. We think there are three that are pretty solid. There are four teams, Duke, Kansas, Kentucky, or Auburn, who might be a number one seed. Cade, which one of those four would you place on the number one seed line?
I think I like Kansas the most out of the teams that we have kind of selected here. They have the best non-conference strength of schedule out of all the teams, and they're 15-6 in quads 1 and 2, and obviously that's a pretty good record, as well as having 6 road wins. I just think that all those numbers there are a great case for why they should be on the 1 seed, as well as having multiple quad 1 wins over Baylor, Texas Tech, Michigan State, and Iowa State. I just think that really you can't get any better than those numbers. As you can see, that most of them are the best out of the teams we have, and you just can't really compete with good numbers. So,
and Kansas was on the 1 seed line, right, in the reveal, I believe.
Yeah,
they were the fourth number one. But they've lost a few games. Luke, which team are you going with? Would you discuss if you were in the committee?
Yeah, I think it's between Auburn and Duke for the last 1 seed, and I was looking into it. I think I'm going to lean towards Duke just because their top wins, I would say, are better than Auburn's top wins. They beat Kentucky and Gonzaga, and beating Gonzaga is a very big deal, I feel like, and that's what I think pushes them to be a 1 over Auburn, who's been struggling recently.
I think I would tend to go with Duke a little bit because of their quality of wins. Their low number 1. I think Cade is spot on. For me, it's between Duke and Kansas. The Baylor-Kansas outcome shifted that more to Baylor and dropped Kansas. In my mind, Kansas has the quad wins and the quad 1 and 2. Cade is absolutely correct. It's kind of hard to look past that. But I think Duke's quality, and I think the committee liked Duke because we were surprised that Duke was a 2 seed, which shows that this committee might be looking at the types of losses and some of those quality metrics, performance metrics, predictive metrics, that offensive efficiency and defensive efficiency, because Duke is very, very good in those areas. So our second question here before we get to the main topic is, what seed should Wisconsin get? Wisconsin's leading the Big Ten, likely to at least share the Big Ten title. They have outstanding quad 1 and quad 2 records, I believe 9-7, 16 overall. Their predictive metrics, the offense and defensive efficiencies, are not as good as some of the other teams on the 2 and 3 seed line. So, Luke, where would you argue Wisconsin needs to be, and where do you think they'll end up based on what we know about the committees?
Well, I mean, I would argue them to be a 2 seed, and you want them to be a 2 seed with the resume that they have. But sadly, you have to look into the net and where that's at. And them having a 20 net, I think it's kind of hard for us to move them up to a 2. I think if they can get that net within around the 15 range, you could get yourself to make the move. because they're 9-3 in quad one, which is the best, tied best with Baylor for the best percentage in quad one of anybody in the country. So I think the net is the only thing holding them as a 3 seed for me.
Cade, where would you put Wisconsin, and then where do you think they'll end up? I think Cade is either frozen or really thinking through this question right now. So, Cade, we'll pop you back out and get reconnected, and we'll go forward. I agree, man. You win the Big Ten, a tough conference. You have those kind of quad numbers. It just seems that it should be a number 2 seed. But the net, and I know people say the net is a sorting tool. It's not an absolute thing. Yeah, we are very aware of that. But tradition and trends have shown that the top 2 seed lines are generally single-digit seeds. And Wisconsin being a 20 would really put that trend in a spot. So I think it's obviously going to be either a 2 or a 3 seed for Wisconsin unless they stumble here down the stretch. So we have several live viewers. If you have any questions for us as we start talking about the bubble, go ahead and put those in the chat. We'll see them and we'll try to answer them here before the evening is over. But we're going to talk about 19 teams that we have for 12 spots. And there's a few teams ahead of them that may be seated too high right now. Our seed line from line 9 through 12, and even some on the 8 seed lines, all have resumes that could be moved down lower. Other teams could be on our 11 seed line, and we could make an argument that they could be a 9. We really have some work to do, and I think that it'll be a struggle. It'll be a struggle to eventually be very accurate on this 9 to 12 seed unless things settle in. So we have Cade back with us now, but we'll go to the bubble here. And we think there are 5 types of teams. And it depends on what the committee is going to emphasize, that those teams will be higher in this 9 to 12 seed lines, and the other teams will fall more towards the cut line. There are teams with a higher number of quad 1 and 2 wins and or some quality wins, but they have really tough predictive metrics, those offensive and defensive efficiencies. Those teams you want to put in because they have beaten teams that have high nets, but their offense and defense and their overall net ranking is not very high. Second, we have teams with very few quad 1 wins or combined 1 and 2 wins, but they have really good offensive and defensive efficiency metrics. Those are tough too. Is how do you compare a team with 1 quad 1 to a team that has 4 or 5? That becomes difficult in seeding. Then you always have the non-conference schedule, which the committee likes. How do you deal with that? There are teams in both groups 1 and 2 that we just shared that have good non-conference schedules and really bad non-conference schedules, and you try to mix that in. Then you have the injury group, and there are teams like VCU, which we'll talk about later, which had a significant injury, someone out for 8 games. That was their starting point guard. What impact does that have on a resume that might not match up with other teams? And the 5th type of group is the lower opportunity group. They have decent quad 1 and 2 wins, but they're a lot lower numbers than your Power 5. These are your mid-majors, what we call the lower opportunity group. How do you rank them and compare them to teams from major conferences who get a nice win against a named opponent, and that named opponent looks a lot better than a win inside your own smaller conference? So those 5 things give us some pause, and we're going to break it down for you right now and talk a little bubble. So Cade, we're going to pick teams, and then we're going to talk about the resume, and then we're going to debate where we see them. So, Cade, go ahead with your first selection.
My first selection is Wake Forest, and I think Wake Forest is a team that kind of slips under the radar with their 36 net. But when you look deeper into them, their strength of schedule is 337. And in the last full year of the bracket, Iowa was the only team with a 300-plus strength of schedule. And their strength of schedule was only 302. And they had a 43 net, and their record in quads 1 and 2 was only 11 and 10. So I think taking all that into consideration, with Wake Forest's quad 1 and 2 record being 5-8, I definitely think that there's a case to be made for them to move down or maybe even move out, depending on how they do in the last.
Yeah, Wake Forest is interesting because they have those low quad 1 wins, but they're 23-8 and 36. Those predictive metrics are outstanding. We have them as a 10 seed right now. Very easily could be at 11 or in the first 4 out. Luke, your thoughts on Wake Forest?
Yeah, I agree with you. They're just a hard team to read because they're in the ACC, which has been down this year, and they haven't had as many opportunities as you would think. But they've won. They have a good record. Their net shows that they've won a lot of games. It's just the quality of wins. So how do you weigh that versus a team like Rutgers that we're about to talk about, who's the complete opposite?
And so we have a question in our chat from Alec. Thanks for asking. What does Indiana have to do to at least get in the first 4? They're going to have to try to beat Purdue. If they don't beat Purdue, then it's going to have to be a rather long run. At least win 1, 2, or 3 games, get to that championship game. You're probably going to have to count on at least 2 wins in the Big Ten tournament to even be considered for that last 4. And at that point, that's Friday. You would win that game on Friday, and the committee is almost done selecting teams on Friday, Saturday morning. So if Indiana does lose to Purdue and then wins the 8-9 game and upsets the number 1 seed, they would have a shot. But without that, without a win at Purdue really gets them a boost. So that's probably priority number 1. All right, Cade, your second team that you want to talk about.
My second team is Oregon. And I think that, looking at Oregon being our last team in right now, is the biggest thing that I see is their 59 net being able to hold them in right now, as well as their 27 non-conference strength of schedule. So those 2 things I think hold them in, just because like a 59 net really isn't that terrible. And they also have some solid wins over UCLA twice, with one of those being on the road, and then as well as having 5 road wins. I think all those factors are able to hold them in, and the biggest thing that might, look to drop them out is those 3 quad 3 losses. So whenever you can have a net lower than 60, I think you're pretty safe, especially when you're able to beat UCLA twice. So yeah, my next.
I think those wins matter. In fact, that's why when I did the sorting this afternoon, I moved them in because I wrote out a 19 team list spreadsheet on paper instead of using Google Sheets. But Oregon, Miami, Creighton, and Rutgers all have 3 quad 1A wins, the best quad 1 wins you can get. And Oregon was in that group. And so I decided that if wins matter, we're going to put all 4 of those teams in. And that's still open for debate. But I do think Oregon has a shot simply because, as Cade said, those 2 wins over UCLA speak volumes. And those are the Oregon's 3, Miami's 4, Creighton's 5, Rutgers 6 quad 1 wins are almost as much as anyone else. Xavier has 5, Wyoming has 4, but they're the lower types of quad 1 wins. So I think we got to look at Oregon. Earlier on, I thought those 3 losses were the determining factor to keep Oregon out, but they're getting a serious look from us. Luke, any thoughts on Oregon?
Yeah, I think the hard part for me in having them in is that they're in the Pac-12 and they're just sitting at 17 and 11. I don't think the Pac-12 is a strong enough conference for you to have a record like that and hold your spot in the tournament. They do have some big wins over UCLA, but also if you look at the flip side of that, they've lost to Arizona State twice. Stanford got blown out by BYU, and California, they lost by 14. So, I mean, they're a very hard team to judge, but I feel like if if it were my decision, I don't know if I would be able to have them in.
Yeah, I'm not advocating much for them. I think they're really a team that is out. I just put them in for consistency of argument to start out. So, all right, now Luke, we'll go to you. You have picked two teams to talk about that are on the bubble. Fire off with your first team.
I'm looking at the comments, and I do agree that they said that about the Pac-12 last year, and UCLA did have something to say about that. But my first team to argue is Rutgers, and I think you just have to look at the teams they've beaten. You got to be pretty amazed. They've beaten Purdue, Michigan State, Ohio State, Wisconsin, Illinois, and then also they just beat IU last night. I think those wins are just flat out amazing. I know they've had some really bad losses like we were just talking about with Oregon, but I think their top wins outweigh Oregon's top wins because outside of Oregon's two UCLA wins, I'm not real sure what else they have up there. And Rutgers just has a list that keeps going.
Cade, your thoughts on Rutgers? Cade must be having some internet issues up there at his house on the north side of Delphi. Rutgers almost has to be in now that they dropped to a net of 75. They have to win against Penn State, I believe, is their last game. They play someone they should win at home. I believe it's at home, and then they would have to really, really work hard to not lose that first game. I think they may, depending on where they end in the tournament. If they're 6, they're likely to play the 11 or 12. If they're 7, they'll play the 10th place team. That first game they can't lose because that would be a bad loss. I think they're almost at some point safe. We have them in the first 4 just because all of their metrics are bad except for their wins. Their net of 75, their losses, their non-conference strength of schedule, everything points to them being not a tournament team. Cade, thoughts on Rutgers?
I like them, and I like their amount of quad 1 wins and all those quality wins. And I think I've been saying it like right as they started to win all these games that I was really pushing for them to be in the tournament. But with a road record of 4-9, I think that, obviously having road wins is good. But when you're only able to have only 4 of them, I think if you're being such a good team late, I feel like you need more road wins to really solidify yourself even more with those quality wins to stay in the tournament. So if anything, I'm not sure if their last game is on the road, but if it is, that'd definitely be a big game for them to win.
Your next team, Luke.
Yeah, I'm gonna look at SMU next, and to me, they're just a really tough team to dissect and try and figure out because their resume is just pretty bland, to be honest. They're 5-5 in the first 2 quads, and they have 1 loss in both quad 3 and quad 4. Their net's at 49, which is just okay for the conference that they're in. You would like to see it a little better. But looking into games that they've played, I know we don't like to go head-to-head, but they did get blown out by Oregon, which could maybe play a role here. And also, like we've talked about this week in our meetings, they've beaten Memphis twice, which says something as well. And they potentially could play them again here in the tournament. And I think for them that game might play a pretty big role, and they might have to win that game to get in.
That's going to be interesting because that's a Saturday afternoon semifinal. If the 2 seed and 3 seed, which I believe they're going to match up, I'll have to double check that when the tournament bracket comes out. But if they're the 2 and 3 seeds, they will meet up Saturday evening. And if SMU wins, they have beat Memphis 3 times. And again, it's the total body of work, and it's not head to head. But man, it's awful hard to put a team in that's also kind of on the bubble. That you beat 3 times, and they beat Houston, the champion. And I do think sometimes, you're supposed to compare every team to every team to be fair. But I do think sometimes if the American Conference is a good basketball conference, and if you have teams that are on the bubble, that team might get in rather than your fourth team, fifth team from the Pac-12, or your eighth team from the. If everything's even, that additional conference, I think when we talk VCU, the A10 is that way. Davidson's been really good. You got VCU, and you've got some good teams in that conference. It's been very, very competitive. You wonder if the committee will push to give that conference another bid as long as that team is close and tight with some other teams. I don't think they would ever do that and jump a team that was more deserving. But if you're looking at Oregon and you're looking at Wake Forest and you're looking at VCU and SMU and it's a close resume, you wonder if they'll go with that extra conference. Cade, any thoughts on SMU?
Yeah, I agree with Luke in saying that I don't necessarily like them to move up. I know that obviously with any of these teams that we're talking about right now, you can make a case for them to move up. But we've kind of talked about quad 4 losses and how those can kind of be outshined by having quality wins. But SMU being a team with only 2 quad 1 wins, they don't really have any wins to outshine a quad 4 loss. So to me, those 2 losses in quad 3 and 4 really stand out when you're not able to, win the bigger games that you need to kind of open people's eyes to how good of a team that you think you are.
So my team on the bubble that we just recently moved out here from Indiana is Notre Dame. The Fighting Irish are lost a tough game to Florida State. They are in the metrics 2-6 in quad 1, 3-2 in quad 2 for a combined record of 5-8. They have a quad 3 loss. Their performance predictive metrics 50, 52, 50 are some of the lowest of the teams. If you average those, are a lot lower than a Memphis, a North Carolina, Wake Forest, Virginia Tech, even inside their own conference. Those metrics, offensive and defensive efficiency, are lower. The plus for them, they've just taken some conference losses, plus that were towards the quad 3 at Boston College is probably their worst loss. The other ones on the road to Texas A&M are neutral against Texas A&M from the SEC. And Texas A&M has 17 wins. Florida State has been a traditionally strong team, not so this year, and lost by 4 just the other night. And then everything else is a quad 1 loss. But they're in a group, guys, of our bubble teams that are out. Loyola has 2 quad 1, Notre Dame 2 quad 1, Florida, SMU, 4 teams that we have there have 2 quad 1 wins. And when you look at the teams that we have in, VCU is the only at-large with 2 that is on the bubble. You have Wake Forest and North Carolina who have some other issues with 1. So we kind of didn't absolutely say if you have only 2 quad 1 wins, but it does show that these teams are struggling. Cade, your thought on the Fighting Irish?
I was just looking at their road wins and their quad 1 and 2 wins combined, and looking at Wake Forest as well. We talked about them earlier. They are only 5-8 in quads 1 and 2, as well as Notre Dame. So I think that Notre Dame has a chance, an outside chance, to be considered to be in. And obviously, we had them in at one point. But having those 7 road wins definitely looks good on a resume, as well as that non-conference strength of schedule of 29. So, they've been playing people. They just haven't been able to win. But they have been able to win on the road, which the committee definitely takes into consideration. So that, to me, is the biggest thing for Notre Dame and their chances to get in the tournament.
I'm glad you brought up that strength of schedule. I skipped that 29th non-conference schedule. That's really outstanding. So Notre Dame challenged themselves in the non-conference, and that's the reason we've had them in, as well as the Kentucky win at home. Luke, your thought on Notre Dame?
Yeah, I think they just fit into what the ACC is this year, and that's a conference that has not had many quad 1 wins at all, and that's through the board with Wake Forest, Notre Dame, and also someone else we were looking at, Virginia Tech. None of them have a high amount of quad 1 wins or quality quad 1 wins So it's very hard to look at these teams in the ACC for me. And just Notre Dame, I agree that they should be out because they really, outside of Kentucky, have not done much at all, to be real honest.
And so my last team here over my shoulder is our new banner, thanks to PS Ram Fan at VCU_Ram on Twitter. One of our loyal VCU followers said that we didn't have enough VCU stuff in the Indiana man cave down here. And since we have VCU in and Indiana out, and that pains me because I'm an Indiana grad, I thought I'd put up the banner tonight for you, PS Ram Fan, if you're watching. It'll probably stay up until Selection Sunday, and hopefully they win at St. Louis. I think it will solidify their berth or two. But VCU's interesting. VCU played its first 8 games without its starting point guard. They lost 4 games. 2 of them are bad losses. One is to Wagner, who was one of the best teams in their conference. They lost to Chattanooga, who is a 1 or 2 seed in their conference tournament. And then they lost to Auburn. Not Auburn. I'm going to have to double check that here real quick. They lost to Baylor by 8 without their point guard. They lost to Connecticut in overtime by 7. Those are teams that are on our 1 seed line and 5 seed line without their starting point guard. Since he's been back, they have only lost 3 games. And none of them are quad 3 and 4. So they're 2-2 in quad 1. They're 4-4 in quad 2. That's a 500 record. Some of the things that we look at, their strength of schedule is outstanding, especially for an A10 at 67 non-conference. So they challenge themselves in that. Strength of record and KPI are outstanding ahead of everyone else. Their predictive metrics of offense and defensive efficiency are low. That's why the net at 48, Sagarin 47, Ken Palm 61. Those would be the reasons. And just the best win for VCU is Davidson, who is the number 1 seed. And besides that, there are not too many wins against the field. That's going to keep VCU out. And I think that's why VCU is out of a lot of brackets. If you look at the bracket matrix and other sources, because they don't have many wins against the field. But remember, VCU played last year and was the only team that got struck down by COVID and couldn't compete in their first game. The committee always does something a little bit different than people expect with that last bid. And if VCU is close enough to have a debate between 2 or 3 teams and they do okay and get to the championship of the A10, which would be played Sunday, so there's another late tournament that'll mess with our bracket. And the injury effect, I think VCU is going to sneak into that first 4 at least. Cade, any thoughts on VCU?
I definitely like them to be in the bracket right now. And I think that their strength of schedule being at 65 kind of trickles down into every other stat you look at. Because sometimes you have a team like Wyoming where their non-conference strength schedule is 177. And then you look at everything else and you're like, well, their metrics are good, but they're not really playing anyone. Well, VCU has a 65 strength of schedule, and they've been able to win 9 games on the road and only lose 7 games total. So that, I think those 2 numbers to me are the biggest thing that really stands out on their resume. They might not have the greatest wins or biggest wins, but just the fact that they've been able to take advantage of their good strength of schedule and win games on the road, I think that keeps them in.
The road record is a fantastic comment there, Cade. Luke, your thoughts on VCU? I know they probably should be out mathematically and what we've done. I just have a feeling. I hope I'm not selling that to you guys or whatever. It might need to, throw it in my face a little bit here and get them out a little bit. But I do think that this is that group of teams that have limited opportunities. They scheduled well. They play well on the road. They're 500 in those quads. I think they might get in.
Yeah, I think I agree, because if you look at it, a 9-1 road record, even though they're not in the toughest conference, going 9-1 on the road is tough no matter what conference you're in. So I think that is what is holding them in, honestly. And also, it might partially be by default that they're getting held in because they're 500 in the first 2 quads. And even though that's a low number and it's only 2 in quad 1 and 4 wins in quad 2, a lot of these other teams that we're looking at are even worse than that. So even though they don't have the strongest resume, I think they're holding on by a thread.
You know, you make a good point that 500 in quad 1 and 2 is interesting because there's teams that are 2 games under 500 in that combined and have 3 quad 3 losses or have some quad 4 losses in there. And those losses are the one thing I don't quite understand how that committee values them. But when you look at a team who's only quad 3 losses to Wagner, who has won over 22 games in a smaller conference, and it was early without the point guard, and it's from A10, a typically good conference. St. Louis has been close. Dayton made a run to be in our bracket at one point. St. Bonaventure, until their loss, was close and had a good resume. So it's not like that conference is a weak conference. That is a solid conference. That's one of those situations where I think the committee is going to look at a lot of other factors other than quad 1 and 2 wins. So we got about 5 minutes left. I see some questions coming in. We'll try to answer questions. If you do, Jack R., we talked about Indiana a little bit earlier. We'll give you the synopsis. Indiana is not done, but it doesn't look very good. I think it's going to take at least 2 wins, regardless of where they come from. Obviously, a win at Purdue would be a lot better. We mentioned Big Ten tournament. You're going to have to make a long run for your Hoosiers. Okay, so as we end every episode, we do a game winner, which is our question of the week. So we'll go to Cade first. Which team that we have in do you predict will fall out, and which team that we have out will jump in by our next podcast, which is likely to be Sunday?
I think the team that falls out, kind of looking at it now, I was just talking really great about them, but I think it's VCU to fall out, and that's sad to say. But I think the team that moves in for them would either be Loyola Chicago or Notre Dame. And I'll touch on Notre Dame moving in as we already did before. But I like their non-conference strength of schedule and their road wins. And that, to me, is the biggest thing that pushes them in, especially being in a decent this year, but a fairly tough conference, playing in some strong games, winning games on the road. I think that Notre Dame definitely has a solid chance of being in.
Luke, which team do you predict to fall out and jump in?
Yeah, I think, like I was saying earlier, I think Oregon's the team to fall out for me. I listed all of their losses that they've suffered, and it's pretty hefty, like I was saying. And I think the team that replaces them is Loyola Chicago. They have a strong net, and they're just 1 game under 500 in the first 2 quads. And they did also play a really tough non-conference strength of schedule, which you got to credit these small teams for doing that. So I think they most certainly would jump back in over Oregon if I were the final decision.
Boy, this is tough. I'm going to go for a reach here. I'm going to say Wake Forest, maybe not by our next podcast, but by the first ACC. Their non-conference strength of schedule really worries me a little bit. I know we have them at that 10 seed line, but if they lose a couple games, in reality for me, it's probably Oregon jumping out. And I agree. I think Notre Dame is the one with the win, might jump in. We'll let you guys know more. We have another question from Shaw McNearly. Appreciate your follows on Twitter and appreciate you being here listening to us for this half an hour. We need good supporters and good followers. You ask outstanding questions on Twitter. And so is non-conference strength of schedule a big deal when figuring out teams? The games were played early. So there's 2 things. Luke, Cade, anyone want to answer that, why we look at non-conference? Luke, go ahead.
Yeah, I got it. I think the biggest thing is looking at – we'll do a little comparison here. You can look at IU, for example, who's got a 316 non-conference strength schedule. And then you can look at Loyola Chicago, like I was just talking about. And IU, the problem they're struggling with right now is that they have no big time wins. They kind of loaded up their non-conference just to pile up these quad 3, quad 4 wins, which they did. But then you get into your Big Ten play and you struggle a little bit, and then you don't really have that leeway to help you stay in the tournament. And Loyola, on the other hand, they've lost some conference games that they probably should win in order to be in the tournament. But when you play a tough non-conference strength of schedule, it allows you to lose some games because you're going to have big games that you can win that really boost you. So, I mean, in a perfect world, you win them all, but that doesn't happen. And I think loading up your schedule and playing the tough ones really pans out in the long run, even though it's early in the season.
Yeah, and I will add, Shaw, that the committee in the past has said they like to see teams schedule tough when they have control over it. The conference schedules the conference games, and schools do not have control over their conference schedule. And in a lot of conferences now, it's unbalanced. So you have games you play against teams 2 times, then some teams you play against 1. So that's why conference schedule or conference record is not part of this. Indiana, 7 of their 9 wins are with teams that will be seeded 11, 12, 13, and 14 in the conference. They only have 2 wins. And then when you go to the non-conference, Syracuse isn't in, and they've lost to Syracuse. They beat St. John's. St. John's is not going to get in. Notre Dame is out for us. So their 3 best non-conference wins are teams that aren't in the field. That leads to a problem that usually shows up. Kay, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that having like a good team, or not necessarily a good team, sorry, Mr. Tonsoni, but a team like Indiana, where they're in the Big Ten, they're automatically going to play good games like being in the Big Ten. So scheduling tougher games in non-conference, it helps balance teams out. So obviously with those Big Ten teams, they're going to have that really solid conference strength of schedule. So for the teams that aren't necessarily in such a great conference, it helps them to kind of match up and look the same as they would when being compared to such a strong conference like the Big Ten.
And Shaw, second part of that question, the games were played early. There used to be a piece of data on the team sheets that was your last 12 games, last 10 games, your record in those last games, thinking that momentum mattered. They took that out because they didn't want it was unfair. You have 20 Big Ten conference games. What if you played the toughest part of your schedule down the last 10 and you went 5-5, but you were 9-1 in the previous 10 conference games, so you're 14-6 overall, but the conference scheduled you the tougher teams. That was happening, and the NCAA thought that was not fair, so they went to this total body of work, which means the first game November 9th is just as important as the games that will be played this week or next week. I do think the committee does take into effect mentally teams that are hot and teams that are struggling. You have Michigan State that's dropping, Xavier that's dropping. You have some teams like Rutgers who are hot. And I think that's fair. It's just not a formal criteria stated in the NCAA rules of wherever they state their rules about selection. But I think if I was a committee member, I would be arguing in there with a group of 11 other people. The committee's worth of 12. I'd be saying Rutgers has beaten lots of good teams and been 7-4 against top-ranked teams in the Big Ten in the last 2 months. They deserve to be in. A lot of their losses were early. It seems like Rutgers figured it out. So it would be a point of discussion, the recent play, but it's not official what you've done. And then similar to Xavier, I think you're going to say, Xavier's got a lot of quad 1 wins. They got them early, and they're not playing well. I think that'll affect their seeding probably more than their selection. So, Jack, how you doing? Good to see you in here. I will say this about Joe Lunardi, and I want to make sure because we get a lot of credit for being better than Joe Lunardi and Jerry Palm, and we're proud of that. Joe Lunardi is the grandfather of bracketology, and what we do here is because he got it started in a class, a college class, and then on ESPN. So I have a lot of respect for Joe, and Joe's popularity has hurt his accuracy because he's got to do the script as ESPN wants it, and then he's got to be on camera. And we have 12 eyes looking at it, and we meet every week, and then we talk and text each other and have these conversations where we can iron out some things that might get missed in a very busy media schedule for Joe. So while we're proud of that, and a lot of people always tweet out that we're better than these guys, I have a lot of respect for Joe because of what he started, and this whole industry isn't available if it wasn't for him. So that's why we might be a little different on VCU or other things. The main thing too, with some people that we respect in the bracketology, when we started this in 2015, 2016, it was total quad 1 wins, quad 2 wins, and strength of schedule. I mean, you had to beat people. When they went to the net in 2019, they added the offense and defense, which was statistics that show how well you play. That has added a whole new twist because you have teams with low numbers of wins, but great offense and defense. And you have some teams with great wins, like Oregon, with some numbers that aren't very good. And so that becomes a little bit more difficult. And we've only had one full year, 2019, where everyone played everyone. 2020, we had another year where everyone played everyone, but we never got a bracket because of the COVID shutdown. So we don't know what the committee was thinking in 2020. And then last year we used that information to help us make decisions, but a lot of teams didn't play a full non-conference schedule. And so it's fair to look at what the decisions were last year, but it wasn't complete because of more COVID restrictions. So we're still in the learning process with this net. Again, I think that's the reason why you'll see a lot of bracketology miss on stuff. We're trying our best to be accurate and give you guys the best information we can. One last question. I'll throw it around to you guys. Cade, Michigan. Our thoughts on Michigan?
Yeah, I think that they've been kind of on a hot streak here late, being able to beat Purdue and these solid Big Ten teams. They're almost like a Rutgers, but they don't necessarily have as many big wins. But the difference between Michigan and Rutgers is the fact that Michigan has been able to keep a solid net, even though they've been losing a bunch of these games. So I think that they're definitely a strong team, and I like them to be in.
Luke, Michigan.
Yeah, I think the only thing that even keeps them on the bubble is their overall record, and we've talked about being 4 games above 500, which they are right now, so hopefully they stay there and we don't have to discuss this again. That's the only thing truthfully holding them back. Their net's strong, and their resume is strong, and they have one of the toughest schedules in the country overall, not just the Big Ten. So their overall record is the only thing that's really even making us talk about them. Other than that, they're for sure in.
Yeah, it's crazy because we have a rule: you got to be 4 games over 500, or we automatically drop you out. That doesn't mean that we'll keep them out in the final draft next week on Selection Sunday when we have to submit our final draft. But we just do that to try to sort teams. We've had Michigan a 9 seed, and then they went to 15 and 12. Then we dropped them out, and no team usually goes out to 9, out to 10. But Michigan does. We think if Michigan gets in, they're probably going to be a 9 or a 10 seed. They really need to get one more win. I think they have 2 tough games. They have Iowa. I think it might be tonight even, or soon. Iowa at home. They pick up another win like that, I think you're going to see them in regardless. And then they're probably going to be a 7 or 8 seed in the Big Ten, and it would do them wonders to win. They're going to get in trouble if they lose the next 2 home games and they're 16 and 14. Then they lose the first round of the Big Ten and get 16-15. They're going to be out. So Michigan is not safe. Yeah, tonight at 9, Iowa at Michigan. And Jack, then Michigan State in trouble at all? I don't think they're in trouble of being out. Their seeding is an issue right now. They're down 11 as we are taping this on Tuesday night at the end of the first half. And, they're either – you can go – I've seen 7s. Places have them 7s. We have them as an 8. They could be an 8, 9, or 10. I don't see Michigan State dropping out. And that brings up the last thing I'll say. There needs to be 68 teams. that gets to be some years. It's like, who are we going to ever put in? Because there needs to be 68 teams. We're down to about 6 or 7 teams that are out that we're willing to put in at this point. We think everyone else is pretty much already solidified being out of the tournament. So a team like Michigan State, Xavier, yes, they're falling, but will they fall out? I don't think so. So, fellas, thank you for your time tonight. Keep texting me all weekend any results that we need to move on our spreadsheet. Those of you who joined us live, keep asking us questions at any time on our Twitter handle. We love interacting with our fans. We love educating our fans. It's not about hating teams, liking teams. It's not about being selfish and trying to win this bracketology thing. We just like sharing what we do. So keep asking us questions. But that'll do it for this episode of the Bracket U. We'll be back probably Sunday. We haven't scheduled one officially yet, but we're going to look at the weekend games and then come back with some content on Sunday night. We'll have our TV studio show, second to last TV studio show on Tuesday. We have a big meeting on Wednesday. That'll be one of our big final pushes where we solidify the bracket and then just have some scenarios based on the last games of the season. Be looking for those shows. Follow us on our website at DelphiBracketology.com. We'll put out a new seed list and bracket tomorrow. And again, at Twitter, at Delphi Brackets. So check out our donation page too. Whether it's a flag, we'll take that, and appreciation or whatever. It does help us with food, fees, and other things. We appreciate that. So for Cade Nelson and Luke Smock, we're wishing you a good night and that your team continues to win the big games.